Good morning, and welcome to yet another beautiful day in California. My name is Wayne Arnold, and I am the moderator and one of the speakers for the first panel session of our fantastic Henry Miller in the 21st Century. And probably some of you, over your experience with Henry Miller over the years, have had this question of why Henry Miller? And for me, one of the things is that his life biographically is so interesting that it's almost like every 10 or 20 years, you have a whole new, fresh world to study about Henry Miller. And in my opinion, one of the richest areas of Miller's life is in Big Sur. And without doubt, in my opinion, the best book to read about Henry Miller in Big Sur is Arthur Hoyle's A Seeker in Big Sur, which I recommend. It was published in 2014. And so without further ado, I would like to bring Arthur Hoyle up to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. I'm excited. Before I begin, I want to thank Bill, James, and Magnus for rounding up us all us Miller fans from around the world, and bringing us together in this beautiful part of the country that Miller loved. I'm grateful to be included in this very special community and be part of the proceedings here. I'm excited about spending time with everyone here over the next 3 days and learning more about my favorite writer from other panelists. As a preamble, I'd like to share with you a note I received from a subscriber to my Substack newsletter, Off the Cuff. I had mentioned this conference in a post, and a woman I didn't know wrote to me. The writer had lived in the Palisades during the 60s and went to Palisades High School with Tony and Val. Her name is Catherine Ann Carter. Here's her note. While transitioning between high school and college, at 5:30 a.m. on Sunday mornings, I'd stop at a local pastry shop in Pacific Palisades and pick up the day's breakfast sweets for customers at a local coffee shop. My favorite customer, always on his bike, rolled up around 7:30 a.m. He waved, and then we chatted about the film we liked or disliked from the previous night. He was quite a fan of 30s and 40s movies, as was I. His daughter and son were students at Pali High School, where I attended, so it was a comfortable, friendly Sunday a.m. chat. For about 2 years, we talked about Saturday night TV films and started biking together around the Palisades. I visited his home to see his wall paintings and meet his 2 young Japanese female tenants. They were remarkable ping pong players. I finally told my mother about my biking friend. She asked me if I had read any of his books. I was forbidden to see him again. We communicated for years. He wrote a sweet acknowledgement to me in The Best of Henry Miller. Somehow the book disappeared from my treasures, left in a storage garage or my storage locker in San Francisco, and found by my ex-husband. This story, it seems to me, is emblematic of Henry's often tenuous relationship with his countrymen. The question before us is Miller's relevance to us living now in the 21st century. Does he offer advice or an example that we can use to get our bearings as we try to cope with current disturbances in our social framework? So in my remarks, I want to summarize Miller's view of his role as a member of society and then apply it to us here and now in the hope that his perspective may be useful to us. Miller did not live to experience the changes in our social fabric that have been wrought by the digital revolution, the centralization of information control in the hands of a few specially trained technocrats, the extreme wealth inequality enabled by this technology, the spread of misinformation and unfounded conspiracy theories through social media that undermines collective trust and feeds skepticism, the distracting presence of mobile electronic devices wirelessly connected that pollutes our public spaces, our complete political dysfunction. The internet as we know it began in 1983, 3 years after his death. That same year, Motorola introduced the first commercially available handheld cellular phone, and the digital age began. Miller could not comment on these changes. We do know that when he lived in Pacific Palisades, at the end of his life, he did not like to use the telephone because he wanted privacy. So it's hard to imagine him posting on Instagram or sending out tweets. Miller lived through 2 world wars, an economic depression, and the explosion of consumerism after World War II, fueled by America's large production capacity and the pandering advertising industry. His poverty excluded him from these spoils for most of his life, but he didn't mind because his aim was to use his art, his writing and painting, to transcend purely material needs and fulfill himself. But Miller did not live hermetically, fully removed from the world around him. He cast an observant eye on the behavior of his fellow Americans, and throughout his writing, he offered a critique of it, sometimes overtly, sometimes by implication. Underlying his critique was a set of ethical principles and value judgments that can be summarized as a belief in the pursuit of personal happiness through the liberation of individuals to experiment with their own destiny, to live freely in a way that does no harm to others, to celebrate life in its simplest and most accessible forms, friendship, camaraderie, and the exercise of personal creativity. What Miller critiqued and satirized throughout his writing were materialism, conformity, ugliness, and the lack of a spiritual dimension in people's lives. How can we apply this critique to the social conditions of our own time, marked as it is by an unhealthy addiction to our technology, suspicion of our highest human faculties, and fear of the future? Miller might well find in our current circumstances the same mass delusion he saw in his own time, simply manifesting in a new form. With these observations as background, I want to discuss 2 related ways in which Miller's life and writing are now relevant. The first way is as the happy rock, a man disengaged from conventional concerns and strivings, who independently pursues self-realization and self-fulfillment through his art. The second way is as a citizen of America who laments his country's failure to live up to the promise of democracy. These 2 aspects of Miller first appeared in Tropic of Cancer in the persona Miller created as his narrator, who has thrown off conventional aspirations in order to become the happiest man alive. It is his disengagement that gives him the perspective from which to criticize the values of the society he has abandoned, and to satirize the follies of the mass man who lives by them. But underlying the satire and the criticism is Miller, the disenchanted citizen who believes in a democratic ideal that his countrymen have forgotten. We don't have to read very far into Miller's work to encounter the happy rock, the man disaffected with Western civilization and determined to transcend it. We meet him in the opening lines of Tropic of Cancer when the Miller narrator declares, "I have no money, no resources, no hopes. I am the happiest man alive." This narrator has rejected the conventional strivings and ambitions that consume the lives of most men in favor of freedom, the freedom to simply be himself. What is it about conventional life that Miller rejects that makes him a disenchanted Democrat? The cancer of time is eating us away, he tells us. We must get in step, in lockstep, towards the prison of death. There is no escape. Miller believed that Western civilization is in free fall from a mythical golden age whose potential has gone unrealized. The disintegration of society forces its individual members to seek meaning for their lives independently through a process of self-realization that will connect them with a transcendent world, the world of the cosmos. This conviction is reflected in Miller's choice of astrological signs as the titles of his two tropics. Miller asserts his independence from the common run of humanity with its conventional aspirations and values in a passage towards the end of Cancer. Once I thought that to be human was the highest aim a man could have, but I see now that it was meant to destroy me. Today I am proud to say that I am inhuman, that I belong not to men and governments, that I have nothing to do with the creaking machinery of humanity. I belong to the earth. Miller dismisses social mechanisms as a means for the enhancement of human life. There is no scheme for universal liberation. Each man has to do this for himself, he writes in Max and the White Phagocytes. I believe in myself, that is my whole credo. Miller's animosity towards American culture became more undisguised and targeted in a letter he wrote to his friend Alfred Perles while returning from a trip he made to New York in 1935, a year after Cancer had been published in France and banned in the United States. Miller was angry with his homeland for rejecting him. The feelings I have about America, about the whole continent, flora, fauna, architecture, peoples, customs, is this: nothing vital was ever begun here, nothing of value. 4 years later, as he returns to America from a Europe about to be engulfed in World War II, he writes a letter to Anais Nin from shipboard that expresses his feeling of dread as he returns to his homeland. On the boat, in the midst of the American scene, I feel as though I am living with people who are not yet born, with monsters who have escaped from the womb before their time. This hostility carries over into the road trip Miller undertook with his friend Abe Ratner to find material for the book he ended up calling The Air-Conditioned Nightmare. Initially, Miller was seeking reconciliation with his native land. My one thought is to get out of New York, to experience something genuinely American, he tells us in the preface. But what he finds disheartens him. The contrast between the earth and the people who inhabit it is tremendous. I can't say enough about the country itself. It is beautiful, but the life is nil. He drives through the industrial Northeast and is horrified. The whole journey today through Pennsylvania and Ohio was like a ride through an inferno. The the center of industrialism, the sink of democracy. Everything that was of beauty, significance, or promise has been destroyed and buried in the avalanche of false progress. But in the Ozarks, Miller finds a community that matches his ideal version of America. First sign of genuine old wooden homes in America, looking beautiful in honest poverty and simplicity. The old covered wells, the types so friendly and gracious, gentle like the earth itself. Here is the face of America at its best. Great peace, great character, even food has improved, substantial and well cooked. This is the heart of America, and like Greece, everything is right scale, everything in right scale, man-sized. Miller's enchantment with this simple rural community anticipates his love affair with Big Sur, a place where the natural landscape dominates and the people who live in it behave democratically, knowing their place. It was Epidaurus in Greece that put Miller in touch with the transformative power of nature. Miller wrote about the Ozark community in his travel journal, but significantly, he did not include it in his description in The Air-Conditioned Nightmare. Miller came to Big Sur in 1944 when he was 52 and in the midst of writing The Rosy Crucifixion. He first passed through it on a trip from Los Angeles to Monterey and was struck by its beauty. He decided to stay there when he realized the hopelessness of his dream of moving to Mexico with Anais Nin. As Miller often did with people and places he admired, he idealized Big Sur. After living there for several years, he wrote a preface to The Stranger, a novel written by his neighbor on Partington Ridge, Lillian Boss Ross. He extols Big Sur as an Edenic paradise, a throwback to the promise of a virgin new world. This is the California that man dreamed of years ago. This is the Pacific that Balboa looked out on from the peak of Darien. This is the face of the world as the Creator intended it to look. How wonderful is the earth and the creatures which inhabit it. This is heaven enough. Why ask for more? What Miller especially likes about the Big Sur environment is that it defies improvement, the progress at all costs demon that haunts the American soul. The beauty of the landscape fuels contentment and turns people in on themselves. There being nothing to improve on in the surroundings, the tendency is to set about improving oneself. He writes in Big Sur and the Oranges of Hieronymus Bosch. He finds the residents of Big Sur to be model Democrats, self-reliant and helpful to their neighbors. He offers as an example his neighbor Howard Welch, a drifter like himself who dropped in on Big Sur, found a niche for himself, and stayed. Howard is a genuine American type, tall, lean, muscular, alert, quick-witted, toes sparkling, slow of speech, musical voice, dry, kindly humor, fond of the banjo, the harmonica, capable of working like a fiend if need be, spry as a leprechaun, good-natured, peaceably inclined, but quick to flare up if provoked. Always minding his own business, always pretending to be less than he is, ever ready to lend a hand, eccentric in attire but in a pleasing, dashing way, scrupulously conscientious, punctilious as well as punctual, a man to rely on as a worker, as a helper, as a friend, as a neighbor. This profile of Howard Welsh as an example of the archetypal American aligns with Walt Whitman's vision of the American Democrat as delineated in Leaves of Grass. Miller endorsed Whitman's vision in The Books in My Life as he wrote about Whitman's influence on him. We speak of him as the great Democrat. He takes in the crowd, the masses, the great swarms of humanity. His eyes are constantly fixed on the potential, the divine potential in man. Whitman is called the great Democrat because he had achieved self-sufficiency. The central teaching of his writing and his life is that the commonplace is the grandest of all things, and that what is really wanting is not that we should possess something we have not at present, but that our eyes should be open to see and our hearts to feel what we all have. I would say that it was on this rock, temporarily forgotten, that America was founded. Or, as Whitman put it, the world will be complete for him who is himself complete. There we have, in his own words, Miller the happy rock and Miller the highly principled Democrat. They are one and the same. How might Miller apply this vision of the emancipated man to our circumstances today? And what are our circumstances today? We now live in a society in which the government is at war with its own citizens. Our legal system is the chief instrument of this war. Freedoms of speech, of thought, and of movement are being rapidly curtailed as power concentrates in the hands of fewer and fewer people who think alike, act alike, look alike. Our government is eliminating social benefits, intruding on our local communities, compromising our electoral processes through blatant gerrymandering and restrictions on voting, and antagonizing our allies through threats and tariffs that we as citizens pay for. Our president has abandoned all pretense of governing and instead uses the power of the state to further his personal ambitions. These are the conditions of war, everyone in lockstep marching towards death. Miller wrote about war in a pamphlet called Murder the Murderer that was issued in 1941 by Byrne Porter. Miller saw in war an extreme manifestation of society's suppression of the individual. There will never be a really free and enlightened state until the state comes to recognize the individual as a higher and independent power from which all its own power and authority are derived, and treats him accordingly. It is the minority which sponsors war, and this minority always represents the vested interests. Miller's response to war is detachment. The detachment practiced by the narrator of Tropic of Cancer. The figures who have most influenced the world all practice detachment. I'm quoting Miller. I mean men like Lao Tse, Gautama the Buddha, Jesus Christ, St. Francis of Assisi, and such like. In Miller's view, to be detached is to be emancipated. Is such a view supportable in our current political environment? Should we, one way or another, take part in some sort of political resistance in an attempt to preserve our democracy despite its imperfections? Or should we stand by and allow the present regime to collapse under the weight of its own corruption, while we pursue the work of self-realization. I leave you with these questions.